Welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast, the show about sparking and discovering endless possibilities where we work, live, and play. A safe place where we can help you peel back the cover to what may be blocking you from being your most authentic and happiest self.
Today's show is a call to awaken to a world of possibilities with Stephen Morris. He's an ever-curious life seeker, brand and culture building expert, and author of The Beautiful Business. With nearly 30 years of entrepreneurial experience, he has served as a trusted advisor to over 3,500 business leaders and evolved more than 275 brands and cultures, including Google, Habitat for Humanity, Samsung, and Disney. His best-selling book, The Beautiful Business, and his widely read insights blog are a testament to his consulting expertise in creating unignorable, magnetic, and sustainable companies. His diverse interests, including meditation, fine art painting, surfing, and beekeeping, infuse his work with creativity, soul, and deep understanding of the human experience. Now, today, we did some deep noticing within ourselves and how we could all contribute in a harmonious and magnifying ways. Dive in deep with us today and live your possible. Stephen Morris, welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast. So wonderful to see you again. How you doing?
I am doing awesome, Darrin. So glad to be here and diving into this with you. And thanks for asking. Thanks for hosting this. And I'm excited to see where we go.
Yeah, I'm excited too. We could go so many different paths, and I'm not even sure where we're going to go. So that's so exciting. Hey, tell me a little bit about what's going on with you these days and what you're most passionate about.
Well, on the personal side of things, there's two big things. One of which is I'm most passionate about helping my mom go through some health issues that she's having. So I'm on a flight back and forth to the East Coast fairly frequently to care for her. And then I'm, as I mentioned right before we hit record today, I'm having lunch with my son this afternoon. So we have a monthly lunch, just he and I hanging out together. But on the work front, which is probably what we're here to talk about, I'm very passionate about the work that I get to do with the wide variety of organizations, and that is the living in the intersection of brand culture and business strategy. And I've been blessed to work with some wonderful organizations over the last many years. And I've got a new book, which I'm thinking through, but I'm not ready to talk about that. So I'm really passionate about that, but I can't talk about it yet.
Yeah, that's exciting. So you can't even talk about it. Are we thinking about a release date later this year, or is that next year for your new book?
No, it'll be at least next year. Yeah, I'm in the early stages of thinking through exactly what it's all about. I've got a couple of different working titles or working themes or theses. And I'm working with my agent to define which one is the right path for publishing, and how that whole world goes.
Now that'll be your second book, right?
It would be my second published book. My first book was self-published. So, but second book, yeah. The first one was The Beautiful Business.
Yeah, we'll dive into that in a little bit too, in a little bit more detail. And you're an author, and you mentioned high level what you do. Do you mind just kind of going to the next level about some of the things that you are doing?
Yeah, so the best way I think to describe the work that I do is if you can imagine a house with three doors. And that house is a metaphor for any business that I work with, or really any business that exists in this planet in this day and age. And door number one, and by the way, there's no exact sequence to these doors, but I can't say them all at the same time. So I'll say door number one is what we call the brand door. And the brand door really explores the question when a company comes to me and says, we've got a public awareness issue, we've got a market issue, we're trying to attract more of the right customers, things like that. That is the brand door. Sometimes we get into what brand actually means to them, and we're refreshing, evolving a brand. So door number one is they come in through the brand door. Door number two is what we call the culture door, which is the world of people and collaboration, integration, and how the work gets done within the workplace. And typically an organization will raise their hand and say, we've got a people problem within our team. Either there's silos, or there's back channeling, or there's low productivity, low engagement, things like that. And so they invite me in through that door. And then door number three is what we call the business strategy door. And the business strategy door really examines the questions of where are we going as an organization, we're at a state of potentially revisioning what we're doing, where we're headed, and people then the leaders within these teams want help with that particular process. But what most people, unless they've read my stuff, what most of them don't realize is they all end up in the same house, because the business strategy is connected to the brand and is connected to the culture. So if a business strategy or a business wants to re-envision where they're going, one of their first questions after they've defined where we're going is, how are we going to get there? And then the how we're going to get there is defined by the people within the organization, which says, well, we got to involve the culture within this. And so typically then that process looks like a storytelling process to capture what that new strategy and or vision is about, telling the team and creating the conditions so that the team can actually succeed in that, in driving that strategy forward, or in whatever the definition of success looks like within that. And then all of a sudden you begin to ask the question, once the team understands the story behind that strategy, and we're going to begin to implement that, and we've created the conditions to implement that, now we have to tell the outside world. And now it all of a sudden becomes a brand question or a brand problem or a brand opportunity. And now it gets into the outside world storytelling, market positioning, and even marketing. And in my world, I see marketing as a subset to brand. So the work that I do, organizations come to me and they'll have one of those three problems, and I meet them exactly where they are and help them suss out that initial problem. But then typically it's going into the next two segments. Let's say we begin with culture or strategy or brand, then we're then interweaving or connecting or integrating those three elements together, regardless of where they begin.
And that's great. I appreciate that. And you mentioned how you meet people where they are. As you think about certain leaders, maybe that you continue to work with or that you initially assess, is there a mindset that you look for with leaders, or do you think there's a certain set of leaders that when they step into this work have more success?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, there's a mindset, and the question of resistance comes to mind here, right? So there's two things that I'll talk about within this. So first, the question might be, or one way I hear that question is, what kind of resistance might I get for, deploying this relatively complex set of work? Honestly, Darrin, I sit in a very fortunate position in that I'm fairly well known in the spheres that I work in. And most of the time, the people that come to me have some sense on how I think, what I do, how I do it, and that triangulation effect. I don't have to convince people typically that these three things are interacting together, and the benefit and the value of that. But the mindset of understanding that all business is essentially a long game, and there really isn't any quote unquote winners in the world of business. Like, the way that we win in the world of business is to stay in the game of business, right? So I have an allergic reaction when I hear language that says we're in it to win it and that kind of thing. I don't even know what that means when it comes to business. So when we think about the winners in the game of business, they're the ones that stay in it and stay in it for their own reasons. They thrive based on their own value system, their own beliefs, their own ways of doing things. And they stay profitable, and they care for their people internally and externally in the long game of the business, right? So the mindset of understanding that, I think, is a really important mindset when it comes to deploying this work, because if we think about it from a long-term standpoint, rather than trying to get short-term wins, if we think about it from a long-term standpoint, then all of a sudden people then can make the investment, or business leaders can make the investment into not just their strategy, but more importantly, their people. And by the people, I mean both the internal cultural people or the partners and communities that they work with, but also their customers. And so the mindset of that is really important. And I think also a mindset of what I would consider leadership self-awareness is really important. And that's important because the way I see self-awareness is that there's two sides to it, one of which is the internal self-awareness, which has to do with, to what extent do I understand my own personal motivations and drivers in what I do and how I show up in the world. And then the second part of the self-awareness is, to what extent do I understand how I affect the world of the people that I'm interacting with as I move through the world, through the value systems that I have. And if they have a strong degree of self-awareness as a leadership team or as an individual leader, then they can work in concert with the beautiful people that are connected to the organization and do so in a sense of both reciprocity for those people and with those people, and in deep collaboration where I think the best work actually happens. Most creative work, most collaborative work, most ingenious work, and most productive work. Lots of studies and science to support that.
Yeah, that self-awareness piece is pretty critical to the mindset and to being open-minded to what's there. And I like how you go through those different doors because people have different strengths. They might see different viewpoints, or maybe they have different perspectives or different values. And when you show them that they're all interconnected, it's like, oh yeah, that does lead to this, or that does rely on this. And that ability to know where you have the strengths or you don't, I think that self-awareness is pretty cool. And setting the conditions, you mentioned conditions a few times. Can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean by having the level of conditions set and in place for this work to really take a life of its own?
Yeah. So it's probably best to talk about this from a garden metaphor standpoint. So let's say that your business is a garden, and whatever you're growing in that garden, be it flowers or vegetables or fruit or whatever, is the product of your business. And ideally, you want as abundant a product or crop as you possibly can within that garden. So a great gardener knows that you have to tend to the soil, to the conditions, and nurture all the conditions that are both within and out of your control in order to get the end crop that you're looking to harvest, and even to have more crops in the future, right? So crop rotation and things like that. Won't get into the science of gardening, but so I think about creating the conditions is creating the soil and the atmosphere of the elements within the business, so that everything can grow and grow at its right pace, its own pace, and that ideally the people, the place, and the environment is nurtured in such a way that they care for everything within the business, including one another and including themselves. So the conditions includes, everything from top to bottom, but it's mostly a human condition setting in order for that business to produce the fruit, crop, vegetables, whatever that we're trying to grow.
Yeah, you're creating that ecosystem for it to thrive and to really take on that life and to be, generative over time and to really work its magic. And you talked about people extensively in our conversations, and here the focus around the fact that we have humans that are driving a lot of this work today still, and we have places of work that employ humans and we lead humans, and for us to get the best out of our people, these are the conditions that we need to set to really drive, right? And I'm curious to know a little bit more as a leader, how else can we create those conditions where people can thrive? And I know you have a TEDx that talks about the beauty of business, and your book gets into that space too. So I'd love to know more about those conditions, maybe the pillars that you think about, or wherever you want to take this.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways to go into this, and the conditions range drastically depending on what the organization is. So, if I scan the landscape of some of my clients, Google on one side and say, local nonprofit on another, the conditions on each one of those two ends of the spectrum would be very different. But there's some things that I would consider that would have to be sort of common in place in order for those conditions to be even appropriate for whatever that organization is. And this happens to be a lot to do with the mindset of stewardship. And the stewardship framework that I tend to think about has to do with what I call appetite, capacity, and skill set. So it's a framework that I've worked within organizations to think about how do we measure how either an individual or a team or an entire organization can be effective in what they're doing. And this element of, excuse me, this element of appetite, capacity, and skill set has a lot to do with appetite first, which really examines the question, to what extent do we feel we have the passion, the hunger, the thirst, the drive, the desire for the work at hand, and how aligned are we for whatever that business is to the drivers of that business, which might be their mission or their own purpose. So appetite really examines like the fire in the belly side of things. And then capacity is really a resources question. To what extent do we have the time, the energy, the space, even the bandwidth to produce the work at hand? And if we don't have those things, where do we need to gain those things, especially if it's time, money, and energy, right? A lot of teams that you and I both work with are stretched fairly thin, and it's not uncommon in this day and age to see a team that has faced, layoffs and cutbacks and things like that, and more responsibility is being put on individual team members to do more and more work. So this is a capacity question. At what point is the breaking point within an individual or within a team to produce at the quality of expectation that the company is expecting, the leadership is expecting, and even the customers are expecting? So there's a gauging system within that. And then skill set is the third pillar to this, which is really examines the question, what are the skills that we need to have either on our team or bring into our team in order to produce the work at hand? And of the things that we don't currently have from a skill set standpoint, what do we need training on? What do we need to improve upon? What do we need to bring in from a skill standpoint, either through consultants or training programs? And that could be anything from, to your earlier question around mindset and or leadership or management training, systems and processes, or even just how to deal with stress and anxiety. One of the things that I'm working a lot on these days is the work of Peter Levine and somatic experiencing, which I'm trained in. You and I both see a lot of stress and anxiety in the workplace, and sometimes even trauma with a lowercase t or a capital T. And somatic experiencing is a methodology that can help people manage their own stress, and actually, before they manage it, recognize when they're in a stressful environment, recognize the bodily symptoms that show up within that, be able to pause long enough to notice what those bodily symptoms are and what they're doing, and then equip them with some skills to work through that in the moment, whatever that moment is, or even after the fact. Let's say somebody's in a meeting, they get called out for a mistake, their anxiety shoots through the roof, their heart is in their throat, like they can't think, the world is blurry, and they go into shutdown. And so this work is, around helping people, being more equipped in that. So this trilogy of framework of appetite, capacity, and skill set are some of the areas in which I work with organizations to create those conditions that you're asking about.
Yeah, I love the tools and how you map that out for people. Even the example to help people take that pause. They get into a situation, instead of reacting in a way they didn't intend to or didn't know they did, or it's too late to pull it back. To your point, slowing it down, like, let's take a look at this. Let's assess it. Let's see where we need to go next. And, really slowing our brain down to get really present, really current. That's what I'm hearing you say. And then the tools, you helping the leaders to really methodically go through this. So you make it sound like this is doable.
Yeah, and I think it is. And I suspect this from your work too. And I think your point about slowing it down is, we could have a whole conversation around the benefits of slowing down in order to speed up or in order to achieve more, right? So even in that process that you just walked through, which is, reflecting on the experience of that individual in that meeting. Look, we've all been there, right? We've all made a mistake, or we've all put our foot in our mouth in a meeting and done something that we're like, oh geez, what just happened? And what's happening to me in my body? That process of slowing down long enough to first and foremost recognize the reality of the situation that we're in. This is true for a collective, for a team, for an organization, or even for a meeting, or even for myself as an individual. Slowing down long enough to recognize the reality that I'm in, acknowledging that, sometimes in this scenario to myself first. Holy geez, I'm stressed out. I'm at my wit's end, or I just went into that state of shutdown. And if you have some training around somatic experiencing, you can understand when you're shut down and then what to do with it. And that also is a slowing down long enough process to work through the things, breathe through the things, get back so your prefrontal cortex comes back online. Because what happens in that shutdown state is we go into our reptilian brain. And a reptilian brain only knows how to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I won't get into the science behind all those things, but we all know what fight is, right? We all know what freeze is, and we all know what flight is. And so when we're in that state, the thinking mind, the strategic mind, the rational mind is no longer we no longer have access to it. And so when we slow down long enough to recognize, oh, my prefrontal cortex is shut down, what do I do now, right? I need to either breathe or notice my sensations and then work through that. And sometimes I have to do that in a public environment. And then we can do that. We can work through that either as a team or as an individual. If the team, by the way, is equipped in SE, then all of a sudden we can all recognize, let's say we're in a meeting and, take that same scenario where I made a mistake on a project and my boss just called me out. And there's 12 people in that meeting, right? And let's say in that first scenario, I'm the only one equipped with SE and I'm the only one who notices what's actually going on in my body. But let's say in that meeting, everyone is equipped with some tools in somatic experiencing, and they notice that I just went into shutdown. Now, all of a sudden, our sympathetic or empathetic nervous system kicks into place, and I can recognize so let's say you're my teammate in this meeting. Oh, Darrin just recognized that Steve's in shutdown. I then can feel your empathy once I get back online. And then the rest of the team can feel empathy for the state that I'm in. And maybe if it's a really great environment, we've created the conditions for trust and collaboration. Then all of a sudden, I'm here to support you. I've got your back, right? And it's not the throw the dude under the bus kind of thing. It's hey, we're all in this together, which is what a great team does, in my opinion.
I'm with you. Understanding and seeing that what's happening to other people or the triggers that we see in ourselves or we see in other people, understanding that as a team. I mean, it shows a different level of care and interest and trust that you're willing to say, hey, Stephen, I'm here for you. I see what happened there. I see how that landed there for you or how that landed for me. And being able to talk about that out loud, could you imagine how lively and what a team could do? And I know you like the word enliven. I've seen that in your books and some of your writing, which I love. Like I think that's what it does to an organization. Like, what do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. I imagine in your work, you see this frequently. And yeah, so when we think about what is a beautiful business, a beautiful business is an organization that is human first and foremost. And the more humanity they put within the core of their business, the more they have each other's back, the more they care for the people, not just internally, as we're just describing here and from a teammate scenario, but the more we care for the customers. So you take that same scenario that we were just talking about, and let's say I'm an employee that works at the help desk of some technology organization, and we've created the conditions for, care and concern and even a beautiful business within it. I'm going to show up as that help desk employee with greater amount of empathy for the person who's complaining about my product. And, by definition, help desk, I'm supposed to help them, right? Imagine that, right? So when I have a strong degree of empathy in a scenario where the business has harmony and connection to it and care for one another, I'm going to treat that customer with a greater deal of respect than if I'm going through a transactional type of arrangement. So a beautiful business transcends the world of transaction, gets into transcendence. It cares for the people like I said, internally and externally. And it thinks about the world that it lives in from more of an artistry perspective, in that the view of the business then turns into an active ongoing creation, risk taking, and an opportunity to move people, which I believe all artists and all businesses do. In the business world, the moving people is ideally moving them closer to your products or services and improving their lives in some way, shape, or form. In the artistic world, it's moving people to make them think differently, feel differently, or show up in their lives differently. So the beautiful business takes the mindset that, a business can be a harmonized, magnetic, and collaborative work of art that adds great beauty and purpose and benefit and value to everyone involved within the organization, including, as I mentioned, the employees, the partners, the communities, and certainly the customers.
Love the reference to the artistic view. I know that's a passion of yours, and I want to dive into that as well. And you talk about harmony and how that really connects the dots, or at least helps to draw people in or pull people in. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Like, what do you need to have in place?
Yeah, so the reality is when businesses think about what makes up their culture contains multitudes, and it contains multitudes of personalities, skill sets, ages, genders, viewpoints, values, etc. And when we think about harmony, the superficial version of that is that everything operates on the same level and everyone does the same thing. But that's not the true definition of harmony. Great harmony, and I think about this from musical terms. I have a lot of friends who are musicians and things like that. Is that when everyone's singing from the same song sheet, but they're singing it in their own way, and it's so you take in musical score the way that you create harmony. Let's say that a chorus is going to sing a G note. You're going to have tenors and sopranos and all the different styles and shapes of voices that contribute to that, which actually in the end makes the sound of that note or the sound of whatever that song is much greater than any solo musician can actually do. So harmony is the fusion of many different types of voices, styles of voices, perspectives, viewpoints, and attitudes coming together to all collaborate and work on this thing that we call the core of the business. And when we understand what that core is, what our core belief is within the business, and what we're all trying to do, all of a sudden people can magnetize together around a harmonic way of working so that we all drive to the same ideal outcome.
That's beautiful. Magnetize is another amazing word, how it brings us together, literally, as you're saying, and just the feeling that we're all able to share our unique voices, and it creates this note that you're talking about. That's powerful. And it's okay, because a lot of times we're telling people to be a certain way, say a certain thing, sound a certain way. So then we're all kind of saying the same thing, sounding alike, and we really lose that space of discovery and creation and creativity.
And magnetizing or magnetics or being a magnetic organization works equally well and maybe even better when we think about it from a marketing perspective, right? So I believe that really great brands, really great businesses should never chase customers. So if they shouldn't chase customers, what's the alternative? The alternative is to attract them. So when an organization creates a brand or a promise or an offering that is so potent and believable, then all of a sudden the right people then become magnetized to the story, to the message, to the offering, and the wrong people, the people who are not aligned with who our core customer ought to be, are actually kind of put off by it. They're pushed away from the magnetics. So we know how magnetics works, like, but then it also repels at the same time. So great organizations who do what I consider really great marketing work from an attraction standpoint, a magnetics standpoint, and they draw people in through story and through values and through making and keeping promises, right? So we think about, in my opinion, a great brand is really a valuable promise made and delivered upon. When I can craft that story in such a way that is so resonant to the right people, and then all of a sudden they're drawn into my organization or into that organization in a way that chasing them around the internet and cyber stalking them can never do, because you'll only be as good as your last marketing program, rather than if you create this magnetic brand, then you're in the business of attracting, and then you'll so long as you're telling stories that resound to people, you're making and delivering on your promises that are valuable promises, then you're going to have a stream of customers.
Yeah, you're living out your values. You're living out your mission truly, and you have other people that are joining you. So it attracts people that want to work there, and they're excited about working there because they see that connection. And then to me, like I always think about, if we can connect with our values and our purpose, we're actually really aligned with who we are as people. We're really expressing ourselves, who we really are. I mean, to me, isn't that a lot easier than being somebody else or acting like some other person someone tells me to be? It's a lot easier in my day. It's less stressful.
Yeah. PricewaterhouseCoopers just published the beginning of this year a report on the millennials and what their interest is in terms of employment. And so one of the data points that they cited was 80% of millennials would prefer to work for an organization that aligns with their values. So not the other way around, not that the organization values aligns with theirs, that their values align with them. So what are they really doing in that scenario? What are they really saying within that? They're saying that I want an organization where I can show up as my true self and bring my values and bring the fullest version of myself into fruition, into the world of work. And we can see within, what we've called the great quit, or the big quit and the great resignation, and the new data that's happening out there right now. There's a lot of stats around people are leaving organizations because there's a misalignment in values, or there's a diminishment in trust, which is another whole societal issue that we could talk about. But to your point, I find it really interesting that this whole value system consideration, it acts as a magnetic attraction for talent as well as customers.
Yeah, it's astounding the numbers you're talking about here. And a lot of the companies I work with are starting to understand the importance of values. They're not just up on a wall or a website.
Right.
We actually have to live by them.
Yeah.
And when we live by them, people actually know the guardrails. We're all working from a common language.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's where the magic really happens, because we actually can trust that we know this is where we're focused, this is what we're believing in, and we're actually taking the steps to support that, something bigger than ourselves. As we both know, that's going to give us some really good feeling that we're contributing to something more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're belonging. I know that's a big, I'll say buzzword, but it's a really important word. I know it's an important element that you spoke about in your TEDx, the ability to belong. And the sooner we can do that, I think we can move through those phases that you've talked about with harmony and being able to actually contribute in the ways that people are really excited about.
Yeah, I think belonging is in this day and age, it's sort of a non-negotiable. And you think about it, or I think about it a lot these days, and I'm sure it's all on all of our minds. So we're recording this in the middle of the summer pre-election season here in the US. I have never seen in my lifetime so much divide in our society and in our culture. And the element of belonging is not tribalism, which is essentially what I believe we're seeing from a societal standpoint, which is really a focus in how we're different. And if you're different from me, then all of a sudden I feel threatened by that. And then we get into this space of othering. And, I won't get too much into the social science behind othering, but we all know how that works. When we see someone else who's so different than us, and we go into a fear mode perspective on that, then all of a sudden I want to push against that person, and I see them not as another American or another community citizen, but I see them as a threat. And when someone sees a threat, we go into all kinds of protective modes and things like that. We go back into the science of trauma and polyvagal theory around protecting what's ours, and we will fight for those things, which is primarily what we're seeing in our society. Now, businesses, I believe, can be a reprieve for that. And businesses create a deep sense of belonging in the world, and this is part of the creating the conditions so that all these voices, all these wide variety of perspectives can contribute to something that's greater than them, and are welcome to do so based on what their own human individualism is and their skill set is. Then you can have the conditions for belonging, and you can create that within organizations, and then you can create the opportunity for harmony.
Yeah, it's striking to me that we don't welcome that as much, and we do kind of protect, we dig in. There's levels of privilege or some level of power or authority we're afraid to give up. And my story, Stephen, like that's some of the things I recognized 8 years ago, that I was not looking at difference as unique possibilities or strengths or ways to advance and expand all of our well-being. And once I changed, the world actually expanded tenfold, maybe 100-fold at this point, with the amount of people that want to step in and believing in people that these differences are strengths, and seeing that we all belong and have the ability to really thrive in this playing field, this equal playing field that's there. And there's a lot of companies, as you know, and our world talks about equal playing fields with diversity, equity, inclusion in programs. And we talked about that a little bit when we met before. And I think the work you're talking about actually really helps us address what I think the intention is behind some of those programs. What do you think about that?
Yeah, if you're talking about the DEI, DE&I, DEI and B programs that are now being dubbed, a lot of the data that I'm seeing is not particularly positive around that. So DEI programs, mostly because of the way they've been deployed in various organizations, has tended to focus on here's how we're different and an expression of that. Here's how we're different than, rather than here's what we have in common. And so I'm seeing in some of the organizations, both that I'm working with, talking to, and learning from, a little bit of reconfiguration of what a DEI or DEI and B program actually looks like, and really focusing on this attribute of true belonging, and holding conversations where, as the culture, any culture contains multitudes, there's a place at the table for everybody, so long as everyone's contributing to the core of that organization. And you said something earlier, which I think gets to kind of the heart of it, which is the mindset of fear. So either from a society standpoint or organizational perspective, we tend to get into a mode when things are chaotic, to protect what's there. So chaos creates uncertainty. Uncertainty tends to create fear. And so organizations or business leaders who are the healthiest versions want to create the opposite of that. They want to create a sense of security and a felt sense of belonging within organizations. And if a company can do that, create the conditions for true belonging, and this takes time and energy within organizations to frankly invest within, to harmonize their people together so that they understand what the bonding element looks like and what connects them all. Then all of a sudden they can do pretty extraordinary things. So I think the data is still out on how to do it properly, how to do DEI and B programs properly. I think there's some interesting conversations being had around that, but I think some organizations are very slow to adapt to what's not working within those realms.
I really appreciate the factor about looking at our commonalities. I think when I first recognized where I stood in this responsibility, I focused too much on sameness or what was, I guess, most common or what I would feel most comfortable with. And when I started to look at it differently, that was still needed. I still needed to find that connection point, to find the sameness. What was different is I was actually looking for that sameness across all backgrounds, all kinds of people, people from around the world in a different way. I opened my eyes to what could be common and similar. I wasn't looking for that because I looked at the distinction of the difference right up front, and I didn't have an open mind to actually look for that commonality. Yeah. So I had to change that behavior. But when I did, I valued their differences because of how amazing they were as human beings. I looked at them differently. The work you're doing is really opening this door for us to treat each other with a different level of humanity. And I think you're double clicking on that. Am I kind of in the same place for where you are on this?
Can we play with this a little bit? I love what you just explained here. And so I have a line of curiosity, if you're game to play with this, that I want to probe into. So there's a correlation, there's a connection between what we call story and state. And story is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and about the people around us. Story defines in certain ways our worldview, but even upstream from that, it defines the self view. So like lots to talk about in there, but I want to keep it simple. And then whatever my state is, which is really my biological, physiological, emotional, and psychological state, and some could argue a spiritual state, is connected to the stories that I both tell and believe about my world and myself, right? So the tell and believe are two really important things. So that's all framing for what I'm about to ask, right? So when you went through that process of what I've heard is re-examining how you see both yourself and the world, your viewpoint changed. So now that I've broken down the story state thing, tell me about what you experienced within that. What came first? did you change your story, or did your state change that influenced your story?
My state changed to influence the story. I had a belief that, and really a purpose to bring out the best in people all around me, and I believe that. Yet what I recognize is that I actually allowed certain people into that circle, into that bubble, until I recognized I was actually limiting who was in that bubble until it burst when I had this awakening 8 years ago. And then I had to change my state of mind and my belief to say, no, there's actually this that's why it's live your possible is part of what it's called, is because there's this possibility I was actually shutting out of people based on the differences that I didn't embrace at that time. And then what I recognize, no, that everybody has this light inside of them filled with the possibility, creativity, love, joy, all these things that I was not embracing. I actually started to look at people in a whole different way and believed there's something inside that I want to know what it is. I want to know how we could help bring their full selves to work. And that changed my way of seeing the world and how I opened up conversations and how I'd welcome everybody in and look for those differences, look for those strengths, look for the commonalities too, because those are connective tissues to make sure there's a foundation of trust and a level of love that's there, that there's a belief that I am there for everybody. So that for me, that's what really happened. I mean, I think I had to hear the stories of other people that I wasn't open to in the past. And I think to your point on that, I started to feel that I was not aware of some of the things that I should have been aware. So I started to see that I was not actually following my purpose. I wasn't living out my intentions with purpose in conviction. I was actually inconsistent. So that was mortifying to me. That's what drove me to say, no, I need to look at this differently. So I needed to change my state of mind. That's how I got to that place.
Well, I applaud your vulnerability here as an offering to everyone that's listening, because the journey that you've gone through is absolutely the journey of human evolution. You as an individual, but all of us have gone through some version of that, I suspect. And I have no doubt that there's a world of people out there, maybe you and I included, that are in the middle of our own journey of continued evolution. And this ability that you're describing here to pause long enough, this goes back to our slow down point, right? Pause long enough to consider or reconsider, am I doing what I should be doing in this, in the very finite, precious time, this gift of life that I have in this planet? Am I living to my fullest potential? And am I living to whatever I define as my own purpose? And am I fully giving myself over to that? Or to your point, am I being inconsistent? I do it sometimes. I do it when it's convenient, or I do it when it works, but then I forget, or I get lost, or maybe I get seduced into whatever that is, seduced into making more money, seduced into the trappings of power and fame, and the things that I think that I want, but they're really not serving my life. And I think your journey and what you just described there is just a beautiful example of someone who has gone through that process of self-examining, who am I really and what truly matters to me, and to what extent am I willing to commit myself to living that path and staying on that path and getting rid of all the rest of the noise.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying all that and sharing that. And that, that noise was preventing possibilities, was preventing the joy that I had. I was holding back the joy and the opportunities from other people. And when we started to really embrace and receive and see what was possible for everybody, I hired differently. Out of the next 8 to 9 people, I hired 7 people that were more diverse from gender and ethnicity perspective and backgrounds. And that changed the way I looked at the world. I didn't need to be the expert. I could say, I don't know. I needed to invite people's ideas and thinking. That was harmony. That was beautiful. To your point about, seeing the beauty in business, that was eye-opening to me. And that, like, my heart opened up, like, to the point where I could actually love other human beings in the workplace without it being inappropriate in the sense of what people think about love in the workplace. And I know you look at that as a possibility too. And where do you think love belongs in the workplace?
I think it belongs at the core. I think it belongs everywhere. And before someone paints me as a starry-eyed optimist or a starry-eyed dreamer, I'm always reminded of a story that it was a debrief that I had with a CEO I was helping through a tough time within his organization. This was during the pandemic. And, the story that he told me is he's that, for all the difficulty that I've been through in running this business, and anyone who's in any leadership position recognizes that it is not a path that's for the weak at heart. It is, you will be tested through your character at your core. But he said, for all the difficulty that I've been through in this business, I bring as much love into it as I do to my family. And these are my work family. And I wouldn't change a thing because they have given me so much love in return. And that has been the gift. This man was in his mid-70s, about to sell the business and retire. He said that has been the gift of a lifetime, right next to his family, he's been married for 55 years, something like that, has 6 kids. He talked about them glowingly. And in the same breath thereafter, he talked about the love for his business and the people within it.
That's a great place to be.
It belongs there. I mean, and anything that is important to us in this lifetime, we are going to do with some version of love. And so I believe it belongs in every portion of the business, and especially at the core, and especially love for one another. And even to your message within your show, live your possible, right? So the world of business lives in the world of this might not work. And right next to that is the world of possibilities. So because we live in the world of this might not work, we're always trying to conjure up what can be our next best thing within the business. The way that is birthed is through a point of passion. I believe that I can change the world in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it together. And that's making the possible real. And it's only done through, I believe, or best done through the leverage of love.
That is the human language as we talk about this, and just how we connect. And it doesn't matter where we're from or what we look like. And in today's society, especially like you said in the US, it's hard these days. Yet I think if we could just break some of these walls down one at a time, one person at a time, get curious. Get curious about asking questions. What brings joy to other people? What makes you tick? What gets you excited? What brings passion out of you? Like, what lights you up? And these are all these questions that I've been trying to draw out of you a little bit too, and your passion. And I'm curious too about the artwork behind you. And you talked about artistry. I'm curious about how that ties into all this work.
It ties in indirectly. I think the world of the artist and the world of the entrepreneur is quite similar. As I mentioned before, I think as a painter, I am constantly experimenting with, what am I painting? What am I trying to convey from a message or story standpoint? How am I trying to move people? How am I trying to make the world more beautiful? And I think, it's similar to the world of business in that it's filled with risk taking. It's filled with, taking chances that destroy or move on from the things that I thought that I knew of the past, and stepping into uncharted territory. I think it's also about an act of human expression that believes that, if I'm running a business or if I'm creating a painting, I believe that I can make the world better or somebody's life better in some way, shape, or form, either through this painting or through this business. And there's also this beautiful act of, in the world of artistry, what I consider professional noticing. So a lot of the things that an artist does is pull together things that other people don't notice or don't notice consciously. And I think business leaders do that too. Like, when we think about a moment of, how the iPhone came together, all Apple did was take a phone and the iPad and the internet and a keyboard and all this kind of thing, put it into one little container. So it pulled together these things that were never pulled together before. So it's kind of radical noticing of what's actually happening, and then unearthing that in such a way that we present it to a set of somebody's out there that says, hey, I made this for you, and I think you might benefit from it.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I've seen a quote from Steve Jobs similar to how things come together when he notices things. I don't think he said the word notice, but how he was so creative. And I think he just said he took what was right in front of him and just brought it to reality or brought it to the world in a different way. And I think that's so important. Sometimes we overlook what's right in front of us because we think, oh, everybody else sees it. And I think sometimes what we have right in front of us is somebody else's profound or maybe even our own.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to the earlier point. So we've hit on it now 3 times. So one has to slow down long enough to recognize the things that are directly in front of us. You know the way a society works. We're 100 miles an hour all the time, right? And so we don't even take like good vacations, let alone decompress the stress that we have. And we certainly don't take the time to notice the things that are truly there within our life, our business, our work. And I do think that there's this attribute of like going, at least at times, a little bit or maybe a lot slower so that we can cover off on the things that we're either bypassing or not recognizing that are right there, that are fertile ground for us to care for this garden that we're creating within our business. Like, and a gardener that is too busy is not going to weed the garden. It's going to be a mess, and it's going to turn into nothing wrong with nature, but it's going to turn into more like a meadow than a garden that has deep cultivation to it. And while I love nature, and nature is a garden in its own way, it's also a curated garden, a cared for garden, a nurtured garden. And the gardener has to slow down long enough to recognize where the threats are, where the weeds are, how healthy the soil is, all the things that that garden needs in order to flourish.
Yeah, beautiful picture again. And I love the pause reference. I appreciate you bringing it back up. I think sometimes we just need to build that in our day a little bit too. And when I talk to people about start a gratitude journal, it's not just about writing it down. It's the fact that you're putting it in the top of your mind. So then it pops up during your day. So you could actually appreciate it. You get excited about it. Same thing with values, company values. There's a reason, right? We're connecting to something that will show up during the day. Oh yeah, that's right. This is the guardrail. This is what we're working with together. This is something we're passionate about. And with my logo for Live Your Possible, the one-eyed smile is something I connect with throughout the day. I see it all over the place. And it reminds me to slow down and really appreciate the joy and the beauty of the world and everybody in it. And that's my reminder all the time. I see it all the time, Stephen. It's just great. It slows me down enough to say, wait a minute, I'm here. This is awesome. I'm able to do something about it and really appreciate what's in front of us. And I'd love to know, Stephen, too, from your standpoint, how did you get here? I mean, I love your stories. You have all these great insights and articles that you present. Your TEDx was fabulous. Looking forward to your next book. And you're insightful. Your stories are wonderful, and you put it into action. You give tips on how to put these things into action. Like, how did you get here? I don't know if did you have light up moments? Did you have struggles had to overcome? Like, how did you become you?
How much time do we have? Yeah. So let's see. I'll try and keep that arc relatively brief. So let's see, where do I begin? Yeah. So look, from early childhood, I was both, fascinated by how the world works and what makes me tick. And, when I went into undergraduate school, I studied both painting and psychology kind of at the same time. And I worked with a painting master who was a protege of the famous artist of New York School, Mark Rothko. And, within that, I learned the craft and discipline of artwork and painting and all the things that you need to develop that. And at the same time, I was parallel tracking into the world of psychology and what drives us, what makes us, what are our motivations, and especially Jungian psychology, which has a lot to do with active imagination and what we would call Jungian depth work, which is not just dealing with the conscious mind, but what about the unconscious or subconscious, and how does that play a role in our lives? And I've continued to study that and work on those things. So both of those things weirdly have, like, if you think about it like a two-rail system, right? Train track, if you will. They have both informed sort of who I've become and who I'm constantly becoming. And so both have to do with the attributes of creativity and humanity and us at our best, or us trying to idealize who we are at our best. And so when my wife and I moved to San Diego, where we currently live, back in 1994, we spent our first anniversary in a Ryder truck towing a 1971 VW bus across the country, like our own micro Conestoga wagon kind of thing, to a city in San Diego where we knew that we wanted to live from a lifestyle standpoint, but we didn't know anybody here. So I thought I would just get a job. I was working with agencies on the East Coast and, as a young creative director, and I thought I would just get a job out here. And the reality is that the size of the city was not anywhere close to the East Coast work that I was doing. And I had some freelance work out of some of the clients that I was working with, moonlighting. And so I just, hung a shingle and started working. And, fast forward 23 years of running that business, 23 years of building that business, 23 years of learning how to do business and how to build a culture, how to work with a team, how to do all the things that are in the craft. I all of a sudden understood what makes a very good business, at least from my perspective. And I realized that because it was a marketing and branding agency, I was, in the business of schlepping stuff that sometimes I wasn't thrilled about. And I won't get into some of the horror stories around that. And I love that work, by the way, and it taught me a lot. But when I sold the business in 2017, I recognized that it wasn't my life's work. And it was part of why I wanted to package it up and step out. And so I could go off and do the consulting work that I do right now, which is really high touch consulting, helping organizations realize their own potential, because I'm constantly striving for that. And so because I have training in both the psychological worlds, I have a lot of experience in brand, in marketing, in culture, and certainly in business strategy. I fuse those things together and just constantly keep a close eye to the world of noticing what's actually going on. And all I do through my writing, and there's nothing magical about it really, it's just deep noticing. I've noticed this, and I'll tell a story about this. And all of my writing has to do with acts of generosity and empathy. And it's generous because I'm very open about sharing how I do what I do. Here's how this could work for you potentially if you're interested in the same kinds of things. And empathy in the fact that, hey, I get it. It's not easy. What we do in this world of business is not easy. And especially if we're going at the deep human way, it's really complex. And I'm here to help. And so the empathy and service is something that's really important to me.
Yeah, you're putting yourself out there generously. Your heart's out there, and I appreciate it. Your insights, your articles, what you share, it's open, super helpful. And if people want to continue to go even deeper, they could, reach out to you. And deep noticing, that's a really important term for us to think about and just be reflective on. And I feel like we could have a few other conversations here just based on a couple of areas we could probably just have full episodes on. Before we close up here, because I know you have some time with your son, and I don't want to cut into that at all. It's so important. So just one last thing, I'll certainly let people know how to get a hold of you and reach out to you and connect with you as you've noted on your website. Is there any last few tips you could help people live their possible?
I would say embrace the idea that possible is possible. I think with some people get really successful in their careers and they get stuck at a place where we might call a plateau, and they get really comfortable in their world. And I would say, be notorious, tear down the things that you think and keep challenging the things that you think that you know. And when you dismantle your own assumptions or even your own belief systems about the way your world works, all of a sudden, and your story is a perfect example of this, all of a sudden doors open up of worlds of possibility that you didn't even recognize were there for you before. So by challenging or rethinking your own life, your own work, your own assumptions, your own beliefs, your own connections, your own friends, like your own colleagues, even the work that you do, by re-examining that on a pretty consistent basis, you can discover all kinds of things, not just about yourself, which is really important, but also about the world around you.
Well, Stephen Morris, thank you for all of your insights and how you share your stories and the depth you went into just today. So I appreciate you, admire the work you're doing. And again, thanks for joining the show today.
Darrin, it's been my absolute pleasure. If there's other stuff we want to talk about, invite me back on. I'm willing to go anywhere. And I have one parting question for you. So you mentioned the one eye smile. Tell me about that.
Oh, wow. How much time do we have? Right back to that. Quickly, this was a moment that I had after I had my awakening. And I was accepting and embracing the world of differences in the beauty that was out there, actually letting my guard down, allowing myself to be a little bit silly. And I had this moment with my daughter where she was doing her homework. She finished her homework, wanted a sweet treat, and I was kind of pushing back. I was pretending to do work on my phone, not being present either way. And when I put the phone down and we agreed on a dessert she could have, she agreed to have Italian ice. So this is a picture of a lid with a watermelon Italian ice. Once we put the lid down, she started to, eat the Italian ice. I went back to my phone, and then when she was done, she was lit up. She was super excited. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw this back of the watermelon Italian ice lid is this one-eyed smile, and it was upside down. And I lit up. She was lit up. Her mouth and eyes were wide open, and we let our guards down to see the beauty in the world that was staring right at us. And it was upside down. I turned it around and showed her, and I recognized that, wait a minute, I was upside down. I needed to see the world differently. I needed to notice what was right in front of me. This one-eyed smile was always there, just waiting for me to see it. So now I actually see it wherever I go. I went on a bike ride the other day, and I found 6 of these in different shapes, formations, clouds, trees, light coming in on the roadway, twigs, and it just lit me up the whole way. And it's just one of those things. I'm welcoming in the world in a whole different manner because I'm willing to look for it. And I'm willing to embrace and accept to what lights me up.
That's deep noticing right there. Well done.
Thank you so much. Have a great time with your sign, and it's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Darrin. Appreciate it.
That's all for today's episode. If you liked the show, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Live Your Possible dares to unlock your fullest potential and become an avenue for others to do the same. Join the community by visiting ignitehappy.com. It's time to discover endless possibilities with equal opportunity for all. See you again next week for more insights on how you can live your possible.